Hello and welcome to Books and Landscape, and my name is Amanda Davey, and I'm talking today about rampaging across the National Park, the South Downs National Park, and the Civil War as it crops up in relation to the churches that I've been looking at as part of the book that I've written on the churches, chapels and ruined places of worship of the South Downs National Park. So the Civil War, I'm going to start with a brief summary, attempted summary, the complications of the Civil War. One of my favourite books as a child was The Children of the New Forest, and that really shows how difficult times were when you had no idea who was on which side until you found out in a dangerous way. There was also a Rosemary Sutcliffe book, Simon I think it was called, that was also about the difficulties of different members of families would be on different sides in the Civil War, either on the side of Parliament or the side of the King. So in England, the Stuarts came to the throne on the death of Elizabeth I in 1603. It was all rather complicated, as by then the church was fully Protestant, and James I, 6th of Scotland, had been brought up as such in spite of his late mother Mary, the Queen of Scots, having been Catholic. This caused a little disquiet in Parliament and in the court. He wasn't as wise as Elizabeth, and had a rocky start with the gunpowder plot in the late 1605 that gave him anxieties. That was a Catholic plot. His treatment of his parliaments was provocative. When he wanted money, they were unhappy to enable for him, resulting in long periods where Parliament did not sit. He had several children, and his heir turned out to be his fourth child and second son, Charles I, after the eldest son had died of typhoid fever at the age of 18. Charles was significantly less wise than his father. He came to the throne in 1625, a hot-headed 25-year-old who believed in the divine right of kings, and started, as he continued, by falling out with Parliament almost immediately. As time went on, things only got worse between them, not assisted by the fact that he had married a French Catholic, Henrietta Maria. That fact made them even more twitchy. Things then got very unstable in Scotland, where he was pushing a high Anglican agenda, and by 1642 both Parliament and the King had had enough, and the English Civil War began. Contrary to how we think of the whole thing now, Oliver Cromwell only became a significant figure in the later years of the first and most intense phase of the war, when he developed the new model army under Thomas Fairfax, and that became decisive. The first leader was Robert Devereux, 3rd Earl of Essex. The king was captured in 1646, and a number of attempts were made to get him to see reason. As Cromwell's star rose, so the calls for regicide increased, until Charles's beheading in 1649 laid the foundations for the Commonwealth and Protectorate that ran ultimately under Cromwell's leadership and his own intransigence from 1653 to his death in 1658. His son then attempted briefly to carry on, but was less committed to that life with less power, and Charles II was invited back in 1660. The Battle of Worcester had taken place shortly after the Scots had proclaimed Charles as king, as part of an attempt he made to recover the crown in 1651. He stayed in France until he was recalled. Hampshire and West Sussex saw the most fighting in 1643 and 1644, with minor skirmishes throughout the divisive years, as happened across the rest of the country. So now, specifically, our South Downs churches and chapels, I think. But it affected the churches and the chapels and, of course, the ruins, but the ones I'm referencing here, it's just a snapshot, of course. Generally, Hinton Ampner has what they call a Civil War door in the Saxo-Norman doorway. West Stoke has shot marks on their oak door. Lurgashall, the advowson was held by the Cromwell family, so that does rather mean that the village was for Parliament. In Langrish, Sir William's Hill and the A272 climb up above the Victorian church. The hill is named after Sir William Lewis, who was a parliamentarian who unusually got to keep his lands at the restoration of 1660. Not quite sure why. Bramber. The castle was a Royalist position, used as a gun emplacement in 1642, eventually falling. The bombardment caused significant damage to the church, where the chancel and transepts couldn't be repaired, which is why the tower is the chancel, the tower base is the chancel, and the transept arches are so obvious in the walls of the tower. In Upham, Arthur Mee, in his The King's England for Hampshire, wrote about a note in the registers about the cost of cleaning out the chancel after Cromwell's troops had used it as their stables in 1642. In South Harting in 1643 there was a small battle of Harting. 3 soldiers are buried in the churchyard. Harting Place was Royalist, and the once walled orchard of the Lost Mansion is part of the churchyard now. In Arundel, the Civil War came in at the end of 1643. It was at that point another Royalist stronghold. Sir William Waller led the parliamentary forces and took over the church so that he could bombard the castle from the tower. It took him from December to January 1644 to pull that one off. Then he went hiving off to Basing House near Alton. And then, then came the Battle of Cheriton and other related skirmishes. Cheriton is the most famous of the Civil War sites on the Downs due to the battle held in 1644 in the fields to the east. The village swarmed with troops as skirmishes spread from the battlefield. It was a decisive battle won by the parliamentary forces. The village is also on the Monarch's Way that approximates to Charles II's flight after his 1651 Battle of Worcester defeat. West Tisted. In a field to the west of the church, a single tree is marked on the 1870 Ordnance Survey map as Sir Benjamin's Oak. There were a number of Sir Benjamin Tichbornes. This one turns out to have been the 3rd son of the 1st Baronet, later given a knighthood of his own. He was a Royalist who fled from the Battle of Cheriton and had to hide in the tree, which was lost in the mid-20th century. Mee referenced it in 1939, so it was there then, presumably. Gresham has a bridge over the River Rother that was built in the 13th century and now a scheduled monument as well as a listed structure. The church is older. In the 1950s, a 19th century vestry on the north wall collapsed, revealing 5 hurried, uncoffined burials. The idea is that they were soldiers killed at a skirmish known to have happened on the bridge around 1643 to 44. It was a Puritan target because of it being a river crossing. Cannonballs have been found under the arches. In West Meon, horses were also stabled in the old church by Parliament men, with skirmishes through the village at the same sort of time as the Battle of Cheriton. Stansted Park, the old manor house, was destroyed in 1644 by parliamentary forces in a single day. Part of the ruined building was augmented when Reverend Lewis Way created his chapel in the early 19th century. The village of Soberton, or the church at Soberton, has the Curle Chapel that commemorates the Royalist Bishop of Winchester, Walter Curle, who was in exile there after the capture of Winchester in 1646. At Racton, this is now 1651, Colonel George Gunter from the manor, now lost because it was damp, arranged for Charles II to pretend to be a manservant to a friend of his, going on a ship from Shoreham to France after the 1651 defeat at the Battle of Worcester. The tradition is that Charles would have stayed in the cottages next to the church. Nonconformism got a surge of interest as a result of the Act of Uniformity of 1662, which was part of the Restoration and re-establishing the Church of England. But the role of bishops and some traditions were hard for the Puritan mindset, and 2,000 preachers across the country were required to leave the church that year. Whitewashing of inside walls began partly as a result of the Reformation as it progressed, but most enthusiastically under the Puritanism of the Commonwealth that sought to exclude colour and ideas of idolatry. So that's a little snapshot of what must have been a very, very difficult time, with all sorts of rows and fights all across as people tried to get their heads around the fact that the king, yes, it's a difficult time. Civil war is always a difficult time. So thank you very much for watching. Wishing you all the very best and enjoying the weather. Thank you for watching. Oh yeah, and please like, please subscribe, please comment if you've got any thoughts triggered. Thank you.